Hello, today is Saturday, May 23rd, 2015, and I'm your host, Sue Brown, and welcome to info2rail, your freight train to modern media. How y'all doing today? It is so great to be here with you. I think it's a little bit warmer outside today. Haven't been out because I've been doing an interview, but I'm thinking the sun is bright and it looks like a beautiful day, so maybe we're not going to have frostbite today. I want to welcome you all to our show, and we have a great show for you today. We're very fortunate to have UFO field investigator, paranormal researcher, ghost hunter, and author Preston Dennett with us today. First, we're going to take a little glimpse into the missing persons files. Jessica Raffeld, 22, was last seen in Rapid City, South Dakota, in the company of two unknown males in the area of 3408 Hemlock Street on Monday night, May 18th, 2015. She is 5 foot tall, 110 pounds, has blonde hair and blue eyes. Anyone with information on her, contact the Rapid City Police Department at 605-394-4131. Okay, our next one is Nicholas Moen, M-O-E-N. Age 30, was last seen at his workplace in Lake Delton, Wisconsin on May 11th, 2015. Investigation at Mr. Moen's residence revealed that he is not in possession of his cell phone or other personal items one would be expected to have if leaving for an extended period of time. He is known to frequent the casino near Lake Delton and Black Rivers Falls, Wisconsin, and is described as having a gambling problem. Mr. Moen is approximately 5'8", 150 pounds, has blonde hair and blue eyes. Mr. Moen may be driving a gray 1997 Toyota Camry 4-door bearing Wisconsin license 967 FUD. Anyone with any information on his location, please contact Detective Justin Hannigan of the Sauk County Sheriff's Office at 608-355-3233 or Sauk County Crime Stoppers Incorporated anonymously at 1-800-TIP-SAUK, 847-7285. I can't express to you how important this is to me, you guys, to get this information out to you. I had an interview yesterday as well, and I'm going to double post the two missing persons from yesterday and the two missing persons from today. So, give you guys a little bit of extra time to get on the site and look at the pictures. We're going to take a break right now, and when we return, we will have Preston Dennett with us. Stay tuned. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back with Preston Dennett. Preston began investigating UFOs and paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his friends, family, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, known as MUFON. He's a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and an author of 16 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines. Hello, Preston, and welcome to info2rail, and thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you, Sue. I'm super excited. Yeah, really can't wait to start talking about this stuff.
Can you start out by telling us a little bit about you and how you got started in all these things that you do?
Right, sure. Actually, was growing up, I was not really interested in UFOs or the paranormal really at all. And most of my family, I thought, were not. We were pretty skeptical overall. And I think it all started to happen following the death of my mother in 1984. At the service for her, at her service, I saw her ghost. I've never seen anything like that. I've never taken hallucinogenic drugs or anything, but I saw a full color apparition of her just a few feet away, and as she slowly faded away, and I thought to myself, wow, I've lost my mind. I must really be sad. And I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even really think the word ghost at the time. And but started to get interested in dreams. And around that same time, um, I heard a report on the news. This was in actually 1986 of a UFO sighting over Alaska. And I thought to myself, oh, God, this pilot is lying. He's misperceiving. He's got highway hypnosis. He's seeing a reflection off the ice cap. And the newscast was very tongue-in-cheek. They laughed nervously about it. And I thought, wow, that's bizarre. Because this was the mainstream evening news, and they usually don't cover this sort of thing. And this is where it all turned into the Twilight Zone. I started asking my friends, my family, and my coworkers what they thought of this pilot. And I got a real shock. I found out that my brother had seen a UFO, and he chased it with his two friends, who I later interviewed. My sister-in-law had seen a UFO with her two friends over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base here in California. And she later had an encounter with a gray type ET late at night, and had a friend who had missing time encounter. I brought up the subject at work, and the lady who I worked with, for years and years says, oh yeah, me and my whole family saw a UFO over the San Bernardino Mountains. It was darting back and forth. We all watched it. And another lady heard us talking, and she's like, oh yeah, me and my friend saw a UFO hovering over the library. It followed us home, and the weird thing was it only takes us 5 minutes to get home, and somehow it took us an hour. And I don't understand that at all. This was, before UFOs were super popular and in the media. Bud Hopkins' book hadn't, Whitley Strieber's book hadn't come out yet. So, this kind of hit home for me. It was not good news. Hit me like a ton of bricks, and really got me kind of obsessed by this subject.
That is awesome. Why do you think that at your mother's funeral you experienced this? What do you think happened that opened your eyes to this?
I don't know. I've always been kind of a sensitive guy. I have no answer for that other than that I was just, a real mama's boy. I was 19 years old, and a young 19, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Still living at home, and was really, there was no warning for it, so it hit very hard. And I think we were all just completely out of our minds with grief. And I could not believe she was gone. And I could not believe that there was no life after death. At the same time, I just didn't believe in it. I started having these dreams with her where she'd come to my room and she would say, everything's fine, I'm not dead, everything's okay. And I would swear she was awake and I was awake, but then I would wake up and realize, oh, this has been a dream. And on some level, I knew this was contact because it felt real and it was really her, but I just couldn't believe it. And what happened is I picked up this book by Robert Monroe, Out of Body Journeys, and which described his explorations of the astral world and how to go out of body. He described how to do it at the end of the book, so I did the exercises, and lo and behold, I started having these out-of-body experiences about I'm going to say 2 weeks to a month after doing his exercises, and became so excited I just dived into that subject and got really good at it, actually. So I've had a lot of out-of-body journeys, and this all came at the same time as the UFOs, and I was doing ghost hunting as well, because I found out a lot of these people I was interviewing who had seen UFOs were also, having near-death experiences or had haunted houses. So I kind of got dived into the deep end of the pool all at once.
I've had those experiences as well. My grandfather passed when I was 18 years old, and I didn't realize that people that close to you died. I never had somebody in my lifetime by then that close to me pass. So for me, it was, the crazy thing is I've never had an out-of-body experience either. And I was laying on my couch here, sleeping, and when I woke up that morning, I just knew. I don't know why, but I said, oh, my grandfather's going to die today. And I'm thinking, what a jerk, Sue, shut up. Why am I thinking this? Don't talk like that. But in the back of my mind, I knew. So I went back to sleep that morning, and all of a sudden I was standing in his living room, and I watched his events unfold that whole morning. He only lived 3 houses up. And I watched him put my cousin on the bus, walk in the door, and drop dead in his chair. And I watched the paramedics come, and I watched my uncle try to save him, and I watched all of this. And when I woke up, my dad woke me up, and he said, "Your grandfather just had a heart attack. They don't think he's going to make it." And I said, "No, my grandpa died before he hit the chair. He's gone, and that's it." I said the main artery to his heart clogged, and he died. And my dad just looked at me. I mean, this was my mom's dad, but my dad looked at me, and he's like, "What? How do you know that?" And I don't know. But I watched it from out of body. I watched the whole thing, and let me tell you, that was something I did not want to experience ever.
Right. No, I know exactly what you're talking about, Sue. I've done a lot of research into precognition because that hit me really hard as well. Every time I would have one of these out-of-body experiences, I would come back with, a dream or a vision, or I don't even know how to describe it, of an event which would occur the next day, or usually the next day, maybe sometimes a couple of days ahead, but not much farther than that. And boy, it was everything you could imagine: illnesses, unexpected visits, gifts, deaths, tragedies on the news.
Wow.
Boy, and what I think is happening here is when you're out of body, you're kind of, time is sort of a feature, I think, of the physical plane. It's sort of a trick of perception.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And when you go out of body, there's a very famous equation: rate times time equals distance. So time is really a feature of rate and distance and acceleration. But when you're out of body, you can travel to other places instantly. The time kind of collapses, and in fact, you can travel to the past and the future while out of body. And it's almost as if time is a geographic feature more than a way we see it here. I don't know, it's difficult to describe.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. My dad passed in October, and I was at peace with it. I mean, I think that's why I experienced what I did with my grandfather, so that, in now when things like this happen, I get it. But he passed in October. He had cancer, and it was quick. I mean, February he got diagnosed. October he was gone, and he passed away right here in our dining room, and we were all around him, and it was, it was emotional, but it was peaceful. To watch somebody suffer like that is horrible. So I've had these dreams as well. My dad comes in my dreams the day after he passed. He came to me in my dream, and he was walking around the kitchen, and I said, "What are you doing here? You're dead." And my father was the most loving, kind, compassionate, giving person, but at the same time he was very comical. He made everything into a joke, so nothing was heavy and nobody was ever upset about things. Well, he looked at me, and he looked down at himself, and he says, "I don't look dead to me." And I said, that sense of humor that my dad and I both have, I looked at my mother and said, "Mom, if Dad's standing here in the kitchen, whose ashes are in his urn?" And it was just, that's his personality. So I know that he comes to me in my dreams as well. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right, right. Well, that was my whole inspiration for learning to go out of body, because I wanted to find out where she was. And it got to the point where I was visiting her, in a conscious out-of-body state pretty regularly, and it was bizarre because I'd wake up, and be in the astral planes and living with her, and that became the real world, and I'd be thinking of the physical world almost as a dream, and it was just so bizarre because it was like living in two worlds at once. And then you'd come down here in the physical world, and you get all homesick because the astral worlds are so bright and so vibrant, and everything is just so alive and sparkly and joyous on those, at least on the higher planes, because some of the lower planes can get pretty nasty, in fact.
Why do you believe that UFOs visit certain people and they can see them but others can't?
Well, I've certainly run into a lot of cases like that. You're talking about where there will be a group of people who are not seeing the UFO and one person is.
Well, that and I mean, where I live in New York. I'm right down, not too far from Canandaigua Lake, and people just don't see that stuff here. But if you go other places, California and those kind of places, people are seeing them all over the place. And I'm wondering why they show themselves to some, but not to others.
Right. Well, I think to a certain extent they're doing a grassroots campaign and showing themselves to, small groups of people a little bit at a time to sort of get us used to their presence. I know, that's $1 million question. Why do some people have contact and others don't? I think to a certain extent, a person's attitude does matter. I interviewed one lady who saw a UFO, and she's like, "Well, honestly, I don't believe in UFOs, so I don't know what I saw." And she described a perfect UFO, saucer-shaped, little colored lights all around it. It was silent. It was very close overhead. And she kept saying, "No, I don't believe in UFOs. I've never seen one," while she's describing this thing that she had actually seen. So a certain portion of it is people are seeing this stuff, but they're kind of explaining them away. It's very easy to do that. On the other hand, there are areas that are hot spots. There's no doubt. Upstate New York has a number of hot spots in the Hudson Valley area or Pine Bush, certainly.
I think I'm living in the wrong spot.
And yeah, they're attracted to certain areas. They're attracted to areas where there are mines. They've been seen often over bodies of water or over tension wires or graveyards or nuclear power stations or military bases. So, there are places you can go where you're more likely to see this kind of stuff.
Do you think that do you think there's some evil ones and some good ones, or do you think that they're here first for good purposes?
Again, the $1 million question. I've thought a lot about this, because when I initially got involved in UFO research, I was horrified that people were being kidnapped and abducted and experimented on by these bug-like creatures against their will, and I did not think this could possibly have any good to it. Shortly later, I wrote one of my first books, UFO Healings, which uncovered 100 cases of people who have been healed as a result of a UFO encounter. And boy, oh boy, there was a lot of, 100 cases of all kinds of illnesses were healed, from, colds to cancer. So there's definitely, I know, a positive side to this. And what I've found, I've kind of come to the assessment or the conclusion that ETs are very much like people, like any other conscious entity. I think there's a sort of an umbrella of behavior, a bell curve, and there's going to be some who are nasty and not nice and unemotional, and there's going to be some who are unbelievably giving and helpful and sort of everything in between. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at. We do have, a rash of gray abductions, which are not particularly nice. But that seems largely confined to the United States, honestly, because we don't have those kind of numbers of gray abductions anywhere else. And in fact, in Europe and Russia and South America, you get different types of ETs. So I don't know, it's hard to say. There's an island in Brazil where they had some terrible encounters, and people were dying as a result of being beamed by these UFOs, and a number of deaths occurred. So again, you get sort of a bell curve. One thing I do find encouraging, though, is we don't see a lot of sadistic, Nazi-like behavior coming from these ETs. I don't think they're flying, light years from other stars or coming from their bases or wherever they are to hurt people. I don't think that's their agenda at all. I think their agenda, we know now, is pretty clear. When someone tells me they've been taken on board a UFO, I can almost predict to a large extent what they're going to say, because I've talked to so many people who've had this experience. And ETs do seem to be very interested in humans, in our bodies. They do seem to be very interested in reproduction, particularly the Greys, who are definitely doing some kind of hybridization program. And I think that's the worst you can say about most of the ETs, is they're unfeeling and have a job to do and are going to get what they want from you, and nothing's going to stop them. But I don't think they're out to hurt you. And I think their agenda shows that they're, in fact, very concerned about our planet. Because while most people will describe having an onboard experience, the most common experience is being examined, the second most is being given messages of some type. And that almost always includes warnings about nuclear proliferation or environmental destruction or alternative energy sources or alternative healing. That's very common. There's a whole spiritual aspect, in fact. People learn about going out of their bodies, about how to do that, about how to not only heal but learn about past lives and do all these kinds of things. So there's definitely a very positive aspect to a lot of these experiences that it doesn't get a whole lot of attention.
Do you believe that we all have past lives?
Well, if you had asked me that, many years ago, I would have said, no, I don't. But now I certainly do. And going out of body, this is one of the things you can do. Now, when I say going out of body, this is something we all do every night. Most people don't remember it. They remember it as dreams and things like this. Or they have no memory of it at all. But the fact is, we are going out of body, each of us, every night. This is what most of the experts believe, and I certainly do. And it's easy to do. It's a process where it's just basically learning how to remember doing it and elevating your consciousness to a degree where you can remain conscious in the dream state. And when you can do this, you can shout out and say, I want to see my spirit guides. I want to visit an enlightened being. I want to visit a deceased loved one. And another thing that I've done many times is I want to see a past life. And so I've remembered a lot of past lives, or what I'm assuming are past lives. So yeah, I absolutely do. I have memories of being in the Holocaust. It was a terrible memory. They just marched me right up to this pit of people and shot me in the back, and I dropped into the pit. I had a memory of being a slave in slave times here in the United States. A memory of being a monk in, I guess, medieval Europe. That was a very good lifetime. I've got a couple memories like that of religious lifetimes. Memory of being a soldier in an army where I died at sea. And it goes on, sometimes I'm a man, sometimes a woman. I was a Native American. It's really one of the great benefits of going out of body is you get this huge boost of information, and it kind of explains a lot of your interests in life or your phobias or your tastes in food and things like this. Often do come from past life influence.
You're a ghost hunter and a paranormal researcher. Can you share with us some of the things that you have actually encountered in that?
Yeah, I initially started out just interviewing people who have had experiences and writing books about ghosts. And so I don't have a lot of ghost equipment per se, where you go out and like Ghost Hunters does and tracks ghosts with, heat sensors and like EM detectors and so on. But certainly I've had the opportunity to be in some haunted locations, and which is always interesting. I'm going to say probably one of the weirdest things that has happened was I was talking, I was in a house that was having some paranormal activity. The daughter was having a lot of poltergeist-like stuff, and kept seeing apparitions and hearing tinkling sounds and weird stuff like this. And I was talking with her mother, and suddenly there was this extremely loud crash in the kitchen. And when I say a crash, it sounded like one of those cartoon noises that you see, in cartoons where there's glass breaking, there's steel pans banging, there's little springs going doing, 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 and bells. And I mean, my God, I've never heard a sound like this. It was like, I don't even know how to describe it. Coins falling, and it was extremely loud. And we looked at each other, and our eyes went wide, and we ran to the kitchen. And I got there first. Nothing. There was nothing. Everything was in order. I opened all the cabinets looking, something must have fallen, but no, nothing did.
That is cool.
Oh, and I've heard people describe that to me before, saying, "Oh, there was these loud crashing sounds in our living room," and I'm like, "Well, what did it sound like?" But to hear it myself, I'm like, "Wow!" And be so close to it because we were about, 10 feet away, maybe 20.
That is so cool. I think that stuff is fascinating. A lot of people, it scares the daylights out of them, but for me, I like it.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I don't think ghosts scare me very much. For that matter, UFOs don't either. I would run towards them if I saw them. One time, Sue, this was cool. I had the opportunity to see a physical medium. Now, this was a lady who did what she called table tipping, which I'd heard of. That's when a group of people will sit around a table and generally ask yes or no questions, and the table will lift up and rock, and kind of rock once for yes or twice for no, or sometimes actually give out rapping noises. And so I arrived at this group, and there was a number of people there, including the medium. And I saw them do it, and I thought to myself, well, they're tipping the table. It was a light card table with kind of a pillar and 3 legs, easily tipped with your hands. I thought, well, I'm not sure I believe this. But eventually it became my turn to go on the table, and you could tell instantly that no one was doing it because our fingertips were just lightly on the table. And, being a researcher, I kicked everyone off the table except for me and the medium. So I could research this, right? And I'm like, okay, let's do it. And we both put our hands on the table, and it instantly went up. I'm like, all right, just put one hand on the table. I asked the medium, and she put one hand on the table, and up it rose. I'm like, all right, just put one finger on the table. And sure enough, boom, it went right up. I'm like, wow, this is obviously, paranormal. I loved it because it was easy access to the paranormal. You could just call it forth right into the laboratory, and that's what we did. We tried to get that table completely levitating. Weren't able to really do it, but we got it running back and forth across the living room, tipping right over the stairwell so that it was floating at a perpendicular angle. And at one point, I asked the medium to, take her hands off the table, and I wanted to try it by myself. And I was able to get it moving and shaking back and forth. I couldn't get it to tip up. But you can feel this force, this paranormal energy pulsing through you. And that was, for me, one of the most intense paranormal experiences I've ever had.
That is awesome. I would love that.
Oh, boy, if you ever have a chance to do table tipping with a professional medium, it's well worth it. But there are some dangers involved. She had some haunting activity as a result, and she learned that she had to do these white light clearing exercises and things like this, and because essentially it's the same as a Ouija board. And
yeah.
And I have to tell you, you've got to know about the Ouija board. A lot of people abuse it, and they end up having a really bad haunting in their home. And I'm going to say a quarter, almost, of the really bad haunting cases I've investigated started as a result of kind of careless use of a Ouija board.
Yes, I have a 20-year-old and a 19-year-old, and they had never played with a Ouija board before. Me, I've been doing tarot readings since I was young and been into this, paranormal and stuff my whole life. And I got them a Ouija board, and I'm trying to tell them, you got to be careful who you're talking to. There's tricksters out there, there's negative out there. You have to be careful. So they get this one on there, and she keeps calling herself Gina. Well, the things she says and spells out and stuff, this is no girl named Gina who's 13 or 14 years old. This is a man, and he's just not happy. And now he won't leave. So every time they pick up the Ouija board, he dominates that Ouija board, and he tells them, this is Gina, and I'm not leaving. And, you can feel that negativity in my home.
Wow, it's like being catfished on the internet, kind of.
No kidding.
You know what I mean? Yeah, that's exactly the problem with the Ouija board. There was a case involving 3 young girls that I investigated who were living in Malibu. They were with wealthy parents. Their parents were out at dinner, and they bring out the Ouija board, and they're playing with it. They were trying to contact Agnes Moorehead from Bewitched, who was one of their favorite celebrities. And thought they did, but then in comes through this guy named Bart, and they're like, who are you, Bart? And Bart says, I'm a demon. And they freaked out because at that point there was this huge, the dogs started going crazy, and there was this enormous black apparition at the top of the stairs. Very tall, and this is something I've heard described many times, just a very tall, black, dark thing. And basically chased them out of the house. And they remained outside of the house until the mom came home. And following that, the mother had problems with someone calling her name. She'd be looking around the house, and there would be nobody there. Eventually, the activity stopped. They got lucky. But yeah, it opens a doorway. But you can close it, through saging, through white light exercises and meditations. And whenever there's activity, you just talk to the ghost and explain to them, that they're dead, that, there's a place for them that they can go to, which is much better. That they should, think of someone that they love. Talk to them like a person. And that can actually resolve a haunting.
I'm not sure what this one really wants. I think that this one, I don't think it's all that evil. I think it just likes to pick on my oldest daughter, and she gets to the point where she's like, "You are dead, go away." And she gets so mad. She says, and it's the little things she tries to do. When she tries to get on the computer that works fine most of the time, works perfect for everybody else, she can't get anything to go right for her on some days. And she can tell because it's like you can feel it in your aura. You can just feel the aura change, and you can tell. And she gets so mad. She's like, "Get out. Just leave. Just get out of here." And she says, "You're making me frustrated." And the more she does it, the more he, or whatever this is, seems to think it's funny to make her madder.
All right. Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. They're bullies. The problem is, there's the physical plane, right, where we are, and right above it is kind of one of the hellish planes. And this is where, people go who are drug addicts, deviants, murderers, not nice people. And when you go out of body, you kind of bypass this often, but you still have to go through it up to the higher dimensions. And when you use a Ouija board, this is what you're opening the door to. It's this lower dimension. And if you, of course, raise the vibration and all of this and do white light exercises, that can protect you. But no matter what, you're still opening yourself up to that. And I think one good way is to not give it attention. They're looking to rile you up. So if you can ignore them. There was one case that was really intense. Here in a suburb of Van Nuys. This brother and sister were having problems with this knocking noise on their house. The sister would wake up and it'd be knocking all over the roof, and it scared her, but she says, "I'm just going to ignore this because it's clearly negative. It's trying to scare me, and I'm not going to pay attention to it." The brother also heard it, and he started paying attention to it, and he would walk around searching for it and calling out to it, and it started to focus on him. And he was just kind of curious at first, but one day he's in the shower, and it starts knocking not only on the roof, but down on the walls of the shower and all around, and when he's already in a vulnerable place. So that scared him pretty bad, and it escalated from there to the point where it would knock on his bedroom door at night, and then would come down into his room and knock on the walls. And one evening, it's knocking on his door. He jumps out of bed and swings it open, nothing there. And it's just knocking and knocking, and he keeps opening the door. Finally, he's laying back in bed, and this apparition comes through the door. He says it's very tall, very black, and it comes to the foot of his bed and starts to lay down on his legs. And he can see the bed getting compressed downward, and he can't move, and he's just in a cold sweat and utterly terrified and feels like it's trying to possess him. And he's, although not religious, suddenly decides that he's going to call on Jesus, and he does. He calls on Jesus, he calls on Buddha, he calls on everything he can think of. And finally this thing lifts up and goes away. And here's the weird part. I interviewed him about this. He later denied it, said he didn't remember it. He had no memory of this. But I had it on recording of him telling me this story. And that's something that I've run into couple of times with witnesses. They'll give me this long, involved, very scary story, and then they later don't remember it, and that freaks them out even worse.
I've talked to a lot of people who experience sleepwalking. And I used to think because I have a daughter that sleepwalked all the time. I mean, my parents lived 3 doors up and she would sleepwalk home in the middle of the night and she would try to get out the window in the middle of the night. There's a fire. We got to get out. And I'm like, I put the fire out, lay down. And, you got to work through these things and these night terrors and stuff. But in reality, I've realized throughout the years, their bodies, I think they're really living in what exactly is going on, and their bodies are reacting to where they really are at that moment.
Right. Well, the brain certainly can't tell the difference between waking reality and a dream. It reacts the same way. So any experience you're having in a dream is very realistic. And the truth is, physical reality is composed of mental projections. Although it seems real, physics has proven that it's pretty much just an energy matrix. And when you go out of body, this becomes really clear because the world is very dreamlike on the other side. You do create it with your mind in the same process that's done in physical reality, but it's just much slower in physical reality. It's kind of frozen. Whereas on the other side, it's all very vibrant and real and doesn't deteriorate. In fact, the other side is the real world. If we're going to be honest about this, we're actually projecting down to physical reality. So out-of-body experiences is kind of a misnomer. The astral body is the superior body. It can do all kinds of things that the physical body can't do. It doesn't age. So I know that dreams, while they seem very ridiculous at times, with elephants flying or what have you, it's real. All our thoughts that we think are absolutely manifesting in a reality that we're just not perceiving.
Sometimes that's not a good thing.
No, it's not. Thoughts, this is something that people really should learn, is thoughts are things, and they're like laser cannons. They're bullets. They're extremely powerful. You create your entire reality through your stream of consciousness.
I believe that as well. I believe that we can will things into being very easily.
Exactly. This is how enlightened beings are able to manifest all kinds of things and control reality to a certain extent, where they can, all the abilities we have in the astral plane of flying, telepathy, and teleportation. We can do all that on the physical plane if you just sort of elevate your vibration and your consciousness to the point where it meets up with the astral. And that's how people are, these monks and yogis and saints are levitating and able to see the future and have precognition and learn about their past lives and manifest actual things into reality.
You're a field investigator for something called MUFON. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, MUFON is the largest citizen group that studies UFOs because the government won't officially do it. The job has been turned to the citizens. It's not the first. The first was probably APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, and that was kind of the model for all the other groups that followed, including QFOS and NICAP. But MUFON's the big one now. It's got thousands of members, who a lot are MDs and PhDs and really educated people who believe in this stuff and are trying to make a difference. MUFON field investigators have to take a test, which actually I took. It was really hard. I did well, but it was surprisingly difficult, involving questions on astronomy and weather and photography and UFO history. And so yeah, I joined every UFO group I could find, and MUFON was one of them. When I first joined, we would meet in a bank, the LA chapter, in the back room of a bank, and there was about 9 or 10 of us, not a whole lot, 15 on a good day. Now, there are several groups just in Southern California alone, which attracts, upwards of 50 to 100 people each month. So it's a really big group, and I think one of the main investigative bodies of UFOs.
That is very cool. I think the government I don't know why, but I don't know why the government seems like they're trying to cover up anything that has to do with these sightings and this UFO stuff. I don't know what they're trying to hide from us when we're the ones that are actually witnessing it.
Oh, it's terribly frustrating, and it's the biggest travesty in the human race, I think, this cover-up of UFO activity, which, didn't begin with Roswell. And Roswell certainly isn't the only crashed UFO that's ever been covered up. I don't think people realize this, but I wrote UFOs over California. I discovered several crash retrieval cases that were covered up. I wrote UFOs over New York. There were more crash retrievals there, which is same for New Mexico, as well as Nevada. I'm working on UFOs over Arizona. More crashes there that were covered up by the government. Our military is hands down, no doubt, neck deep involved in this subject and have bungled it to such a degree that it's become, an open conspiracy. More people now believe that our government is hiding information about UFOs than actually believe in UFOs. It's just insane. And it's continuing to go on. Although this cover-up is crumbling to a certain degree, it is still active, as evidenced by the recent sightings over Stevensville, Texas, where a bunch of people in town saw these lights flying overhead. One gentleman said UFOs came right over his house, and Air Force jets chased it away. He was later interviewed and threatened by the military, who denied any knowledge of this encounter, and then later said, oh yeah, it was us, and it was caused by afterburners from our jets, and issued a number of contradictory statements. And researchers later got the radar returns from a local weather station, which not only showed this unknown object flying all over the place across Stevensville, but actually corroborated with eyewitness testimonies. And it was right where people said that they saw these objects, which, interestingly enough, was heading towards Crawford Ranch, which, is where Bush stays. So I don't know if there's a connection there, but there might be.
That stuff interests me in the fact that I understand a little bit why they're covering it up, because I think that if the whole world knew the truth about UFOs and these extraterrestrials, I think there would be a huge panic on our hands. And I think everybody, a lot of people would panic, not knowing how to handle this. But at the same time, it's becoming apparent all over the place that it is real. And no matter how much they try to suppress this information, it's coming out more and more. So I think that, this might just be the generation where it all comes out and we have full disclosure.
Right. Well, I think we're trending towards that. When I got involved in UFO research, though, in the late 1980s, there was all kinds of talks of disclosure. And as I, did the research into this, the modern age of UFOs began in 1947, not that long ago. That's when this atomic age began, which sparked, I think, a huge interest in our humanity and in our planet, because we had this UFO superwave that started in 1947, and it's essentially not stopped. And there's no precedent for this in human history. Yes, there's been UFO waves, in the past, but they've always kind of went away, and it left the human consciousness. The idea of ETs visiting our planet wasn't even really around before 1900. And so now the UFOs are still kind of new. It hasn't even been 100 years. And now we're definitely kind of not only trending towards open official contact, but we're kind of on a train course for it. We're heading towards it fast.
Well, many people think that they're, trying to take over our planet, or, there's going to be this big battle with these UFO or with these extraterrestrials. What do you think?
I flip-flop a little bit, I have to tell you. I know this is one of the reasons why I think there is a cover-up, because the government or some faction of the government does believe this, that the ETs are hostile, that they are abducting people against our will, and we can't stop them. They're hovering over our military bases. They're shutting down our missiles. They're hovering over our nuclear power plants. And from a military perspective, well, it's easy to see how threatening that it can be. On the other hand, they've been around for a very long time, and if they wanted to take over our planet, well, certainly they could have, and they could very easily, and they're not. I know David Jacobs, a very major researcher, takes a pretty dim outlook on the whole phenomena and thinks that it is hostile to a large extent and not good news for humanity. And the UFO community in general is kind of split. I'm on the other side. I don't think that we have to worry about ETs taking over our planet. If we have to worry about anyone, we have to worry about ourselves. We are the ones who are a danger to ourselves, and this is what the ET message really is. They're trying to wake us up. And I think that's why we haven't had open official contact yet, is because we're not quite ready. I'm not sure if there would be a panic. Yes, I think people do have a tendency to demonify or deify, powerful entities that we know nothing about and don't understand. But if they were to, have a contact with us and explain, and we would see that they're very much like us, our brothers and sisters, so to speak. And I think that's what's going to happen. Back in 1954, there was supposedly an alleged meeting between President Eisenhower and ETs at Edwards Air Force Base. Now, I wrote about this extensively in my book, UFOs Over California. And apparently, we were going to have open official contact back then, and we're ready to do it, except Eisenhower and his administration, the ETs wanted to reveal themselves, but Eisenhower disagreed and thought that it would cause a collapse in religion and people would panic. And often people point to the Orson Welles broadcast of War of the Worlds, in which people did panic. But my response has always been, well, that was a fictional account designed to inspire panic. It was a scary story that was designed to make people afraid. And I don't think that's what's going to happen. We've lived through many crises, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, the nuclear threat, AIDS, what have you. And we've always managed to get through it. And I think that the government wants to remain in control of the subject, and God knows they do. They're going to have to reveal and disclose. Otherwise, it's going to get out of their hands, because we're now at the point, it's the information age. Everyone has cameras. There's enough evidence in the public arena to prove the subject of UFOs. It's going mainstream, whether anyone wants it to or not. They're not going to go away. And that's, definitely what we're trending towards.
Oh, I agree. I see it. More and more people are coming forward. And the crazy thing is, there can be one person on one side of the world and one on the other, and they're having the same accounts. And they're not even, they're not even really in contact with each other, and probably don't even know each other. But to come up with the same accounts all over the world tells me that, you can't just make up a story that the same other person that you've never met before is coming up with the same one.
Right. There's no excuse for skepticism anymore. Frankly, skeptics simply haven't done their homework. If you don't believe in UFOs, you have not looked into this objectively and examined the evidence. It's as simple as that. Because not only do we have, presidents who've seen UFOs, religious people, priests, everybody, military leaders, have all made statements. For God's sake, Fife Symington, the governor of Arizona, admitted that he saw the Phoenix lights. And it just goes on from there. There are so much evidence in so many different forms. There's thousands of cases of landing traces now. We have metal fragments. We have implant removal cases, numerous radar return cases. The amount of photographic evidence is unbelievable. So the time for skepticism is way gone. And I think that's what polls are showing as well, is now the majority of people do believe in this subject. It is going mainstream. And that's why I think it's such an exciting time, because, we're going to have another event like the Phoenix Lights or Gulf Breeze or that O'Hara Airport sighting, or UFO hovered over the airport for a while. It's going to hover over New York City or Los Angeles, a major craft, and it's just not going to go away. And it's going to stay there for days until, everyone agrees that this is an alien craft and they're finally here. And I think that's how it's going to go down. I'm not sure if they're going to land immediately or what's going to happen, but my intuition tells me that the government is not going to disclose. It's going to be the ETs who force their hand.
I agree.
But I don't know. We'll see. But I think it's coming. I want to see that Roswell craft in the museum, and I want to touch it.
Me too.
Fair is fair.
Me too. Absolutely.
They have no right to hold this technology and keep it secret from us. It's a constitutional crisis. There's a secret government. There's these underground cities. These military bases go down several levels, many of them. Edwards supposedly goes down like 50 stories. Certainly Area 51 goes largely underground. There's a lot of reports of these tunnels going back and forth, and these huge underground cities, and this people, this 1%ers who are controlling this subject, are in for a real wake-up call, because it's over. It's going to bust wide open, and we're going to see some huge, huge changes, I think, within our lifetimes.
I don't know if you've ever heard of a man named Mark Brinkeroff, but I interviewed him yesterday, and, I believed in UFOs and stuff, and I believed in all of it, but now I don't have one single doubt in my mind. This man's story is phenomenal. Him and his wife are just phenomenal people, and that was such fun, and I learned so much, and now, I can never go the other way. I could never be a skeptic anyway.
Yeah, I think that's what happens at some point. Once the subject grabs you, it works on you, and you reach a point where you're like, all right, you can't be a skeptic anymore. And this is one of the reasons I'm a UFO researcher, because when I found out UFOs were real, it hit me hard. It was a ton of bricks. And I just feel so bad for these poor children who are in their beds seeing these gray type ETs walk in, and their parents are saying, oh, it's just a dream. Or these people who are driving down the highway late at night and a UFO comes swooping down and they've never heard of such a thing and are so traumatized they end up in the hospital. So we need to start paying attention to this and getting the benefits from, having ET friends.
I think a lot of the problem is people are so wrapped up in their new cars, their parties, their money, their, stuff like that. Nobody looks up, and there are a portion of people that do, but I think that a lot of people, for them it's easier to live in what they know, and the fear of the unknown keeps a lot of people from looking up and actually realizing that we're not alone.
Right. No, I know exactly what you're saying. They don't want to know. It strikes too close into the core of their being, and they're much more interested in just finding out about Lindsay Lohan or who won the latest baseball game or what's on TV, what Desperate Housewives are doing, and so on. The internet is now where a lot of people go for their news. The news is not really even news anymore. It's just this parade of murders and sex scandals and things like this. And now people turn to the internet for information. And this is an interesting fact. The most common, Google item, the most common subject on the internet is sex, obviously, but right after that is UFOs. So we're second in line, and people are interested in this subject. I think we're going to see that hitting the mainstream media, which is, largely controlled, and kind of poo-poos this subject and tries to downplay it and cover it up. And I'm not sure how much longer that's going to continue, as evidenced by this influx of television shows about ETs that are hugely popular, like Ancient Aliens and Hangar One and so on. So we're in for some. This is, like I said earlier, this is an exciting time, and I think there's going to be big changes in the UFO community, and there's certainly room for a lot of research here. And it's going to, when it goes mainstream, I think there's going to be a lot of really shocked people to find out that this has been going on for 50 years and been covered up.
I've done a lot of interviews, and recently I've gotten into a lot of these interviews with ufologists and stuff, and it's so interesting. I had Andrew Collins on my show, and he's actually was on Ancient Aliens. I watched that episode last night. It was on the History Channel, and I've had people, I've interviewed people that are on these shows and stuff, and it's, you know, the fact that this stuff it's right in front of us, and I can't even imagine how somebody can ignore. I mean, they put these doomsday movies out where, these big huge ships, they, like you said, they're hovering right over the city, and all of a sudden you have no service, no cell phone service, no electricity, no nothing. Everything's shut off, and these ETs are actually taking over, and they're down here. Well, not that that's what I believe is going to happen, but there's truth to all of this, and you can't even turn on the internet without seeing another UFO movie or alien movie or the paranormal movies, and that's what's hitting like big time in the media now. And I think people need to start taking notice of the fact that we're getting a lot of information through these movies, even though we think that they're all bull. And we got to realize that there's part of it that is fiction, but what about the part that's not?
I know it's weird. UFOs are pervasive in society. I mean, they're used for advertisements, for everything from candy bars to, I mean, it's everywhere. It's funny, I was at a friend's house. I was visiting him in San Diego, and the neighborhood kid walked in and was chatting with him. He says, well, I'm going to go to Area 51 and shoot aliens. And he ran off. And I looked at my friend John. I'm like, what is he talking about? He's 12. He's like, oh, Area 51 is an arcade down the street. He's going to play video games.
Wow.
So I'm like, wow, it's very pervasive, and definitely in all aspects of human society. I think to a certain extent, the ETs are really on top of things. They're showing themselves to people. When someone sees a UFO, I've become convinced that the ETs are showing themselves on purpose, and that they know exactly who's seeing them. They're setting things up to a large extent. Bringing people to relationships, manipulating events to a large degree. So I don't know, but I think that they've got an agenda and they're following a plan, and they're going to disclose.
I see on here that you've written 16 books. Can you tell us the names of your books?
The first one, which I mentioned briefly, was UFO Healings, and that covers 100 cases. There was one case that I always think of where this kid had a head cold. This was investigated by Leonard Stringfield, definitely a prominent researcher. And the kid's name was Chuck Doyle. I believe it was in Kentucky. He had a bad head cold and was outside in his backyard when he saw a manta ray-shaped UFO hovering over the neighbor's pool. And it was sending down a beam of light, and he's looking at it, trying to identify it. When this beam of light starts to play across the field and move towards him, he realizes it's going to strike him. So he turns to run, and as he does, this beam hits him and paralyzes him while he's leaning at a 45-degree angle over the ground, and instantly, he says it was like being struck with ice water. Not only could he not move, all these weird images started to fill his mind. He saw strange landscapes, weird figures. He heard strange languages and things like this, all of which went over his head. He really couldn't understand a lot of what he perceived. And this beam of light withdrew, the craft zoomed off, and he fell down, hit his face on the ground, ran inside, called his mother, who actually saw the UFO leaving, and they called the doctor, and because his head cold was completely gone. Before it had been pretty severe, but this beam of light just cleared it up literally instantly. And this is a typical case of a UFO healing. So that was the first book. The second book I wrote was 1 in 40, and that covered a lot of the cases involving my family, friends, and coworkers. So it involved a lot of local cases. I'd say probably one of the most interesting in that book was this guy I interviewed who is a friend of a friend, and he is driving down the I-5 freeway, the Interstate 5 in Central Valley, California, late at night, had always been interested in UFOs, loved the subject, always wanted to see one, and suddenly they see this really bright light ahead of them on the road, and he's thinking, well, what is this? Because it was strange looking. It had multicolored lights, it was very low, and had this weird smoke or mist all around it. And they thought that maybe it was a helicopter or a crop dusting plane, but as they got really close, they realized it was unlike anything they've ever seen before. And his interest in seeing this thing suddenly turned to dread and just terror, because it started to move close right alongside the road and was landing as they drove by, and sent on a beam of light which went in front of them on the highway, and he realized, oh no, it's going to hit us. And it did. And as soon as it hit them, they blacked out and woke up an undetermined time later, and he was no longer driving. His friend was. And the guy I interviewed, Kyle is his name, he always drives. He will not get in the car unless he's driving. And so he was really upset, and they tried to talk and were not even able to speak. Each time they tried to talk, all that came out was gibberish. It was like speaking in tongues, and they were in a daze for an hour afterwards, and couldn't even talk about it, which is another feature that turns up. So that was a really intense case that I covered in the book 1 in 40. I called it 1 in 40 because I heard a quote by J. Allen Hynek that 1 in 40 people have been abducted. I thought to myself, that's way too many. I know, 40 people. I'm going to ask everyone I know. Have you had, an onboard experience? Have you had missing time or anything like this? And I didn't have to ask 40 people, Sue. I didn't even ask like 20 or 30 before I found 5 people who, had an onboard experience or an abduction or missing time. So I think it's a lot more common than people realize.
I have no doubt, because I hear it all the time. I have a lot, I have friends and stuff who said that they had dreams of this stuff that seems so real. And, it's hard to keep my mouth shut. I have to tell them, maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe this was real. Maybe this really happened to you. Oh, Sue, that's so ridiculous. You and your crazy thoughts, So I just...
I know my family is still divided. Some of them think, actually not so much now. I think I finally turned them around after 20 or 30 years. But in the beginning, boy, it divided our family. Yeah, my third book, in fact, was UFOs over Topanga Canyon. And that's where I lived, grew up. Topanga Canyon is a small community of about 8,000 people, or back in the 1990s it was. It's probably a little bit larger now. I'm located in the Santa Monica Mountains, right along the coast. I'm near Los Angeles. It's between Malibu and Santa Monica, in that area. And this, it turned out, was a huge UFO hotspot. I grew up there and never saw anything. But on June 14th, 1992, there was this wave of sightings. And a bunch of people called the police, a bunch of people called the local newspaper. And the local newspaper called me because I had been investigating UFOs for about 5 years at that point, and had written an article for the newspaper detailing a few local sightings in Topanga. And so he calls me up, he's like, and tells me there's this wave of sightings, and can I investigate it? And boy, oh boy, I have to tell you, this turned out to be the single biggest investigation of my life. It involved at least 2 years long wave of sightings that involved, oh my God, hundreds of sightings. And not only sightings, cars were being chased down the road. These objects were landing. They're, in one case, the big event happened on June 14th. And on that night, about 4 or 5 people called the police at least. One guy said he was chased in his car down the boulevard, as did another car. They pulled over and saw these saucer-shaped objects which darted around. A third person said he was driving through the canyon with his wife, a nurse, and this object was following them. And it got closer and closer, and they started to get really nervous. And then suddenly it was right on top of the car, and it lifted their car up in a beam of light off the road. They had missing time. They lost consciousness. They were set down on the road at a further point and drove home, they said, by the grace of God. And they called the police in near tears. reporting their encounter. I heard the recording of the police tape, which was snuck out by an inside source. So I know this is real. And they were just a few of the callers. Another caller said that he and his wife, he's a professor at a nearby college, he and his wife were woken up because the entire interior of their house was lit up by light. They rushed outside, and there was this very large circular object, maybe 100 feet above their home. It was utterly silent except for a small buzzing noise, and so bright you actually couldn't even look at it. And completely freaked them out, and at some point it just switched off or darted away. And so I started, I knew people in this community. I grew up there. I started asking everybody, and I found a bunch of people who saw stuff on that night. Found another couple who was driving through the canyon and thought that there was a drug bust or something, because there were these bright objects, which they thought at first were helicopters darting all over the place, but they were totally silent. And they said these objects actually followed them, paced their car all the way up through the canyon, until at one point they got really close, and the husband turns to the wife and says, I think those are flying saucers. And he was joking, but suddenly it wasn't a joke, because clearly they were. They were metallic, they were saucer-shaped, they had multicolored lights around the perimeter, the circumference, and they were very low, so low in fact that they were below the walls of the canyon, which aircraft simply don't do, because it's too dangerous and it doesn't happen. And I eventually interviewed over 20 separate adult witnesses to that night. One guy was driving through the canyon and pulled over with his two friends, and they saw a mother ship high in the sky and smaller craft darting all around it. I'm going to say the best interview I got was from a couple who lived very high on the ridge in the canyon, which overlooks actually the ocean and the lights of LA and the entire surrounding area. And they said early in the evening, before anyone else was reporting stuff, they saw these objects coming up from behind a ridge, a group of about 5 or 10 of them. And they thought, that's odd, and didn't think much of it until it happened again. And when it happened a third time, they really paid attention. They were these oval-shaped glowing objects that were not planes. They'd rise up from behind the ridge one at a time and dart around. And she started counting them. And this went on all night, and she said she counted 200 UFOs. And the husband's like, I think probably it was closer to 100 or 150, which, made me laugh out loud, because that's still way too many. That's a lot of objects. And it scared them. They called the police as well. And they said one of these objects came right overhead and hovered for a second, and they could see this weird symbol, like a sine wave, on the bottom of it, and then it darted away. But they would move at right angles, and they were darting all over the place, and completely freaked them out. And
seems kind of silly to call the police. What are they? You're going to have to call the alien police or something, because there's not really anything they could do.
Yeah, well, the police in this area are apparently flooded by calls because of this hotspot, and are not quite sure how to deal with it. They're just sitting on the accounts. Largely, I ended up giving them my name and number, and they referred a few cases to me. And but for the most part, no, they don't talk about it. They'll refer you to a UFO group. Same if you call the Air Force, for the most part. Not always. Sometimes they are interested. But almost always they'll say, we don't handle UFO reports. Call MUFON or call the National UFO Reporting Center. So, yeah, people are on their own to a large extent, which is a real shame.
Well, what could you really do as a police officer anyway? You can't go and arrest an alien because he came here to, and landed his ship.
No, but they do go out and investigate, and they look, and some of the officers have had encounters themselves, and certainly that's really common among the police force, because they're out there, they're the watchers, and of this place, and there's a lot of police encounters, and for the most part, I think they keep silent, because those that do go forward have learned the hard way that they should have not told anyone, because often they'll be ridiculed. In some cases, they lose their job or are demoted. One guy in England talked about his encounter, and they took his car away, gave him a bike, and his entire group of friends of officers ridiculed him mercilessly.
Wow.
So it's ridiculous, because these are the people we turn to protect us, and they can't tell the truth because it threatens their own job. It's terrible.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's that freedom of speech you don't have when you have certain jobs.
Right. So that's the third book I wrote, and that remained in print until just recently, and did really well. In fact, I took it to the local market there in the canyon, and I said, "Would you carry this book?" And he says, "No, I don't want to." And I'm like, "Oh, please, man, just carry the book. Here's one book. I'll give it to you for free, and if someone buys it, then I'll come. Maybe you'll carry it." And he's like, "All right." He called me up the next day. He says, "All right, bring 3 copies, and I'll see if people are interested," because he sold the book. He sold those 3 copies in one day, and asked me to bring a box. He sold that in a week. I ended up selling like 200 or 300 books out of that one store, which wasn't even a bookstore.
That's great, though.
Yeah, I was really. I'm pounding the streets. I was putting up flyers. I'm really trying to investigate this subject hard, and that was one of my first investigations. But my fourth book was called Extraterrestrial Visitations, and that covered 10 cases of very intense UFO contact, where a person was either had a face-to-face encounter, or missing time, or they were taken on board a craft. And one of my favorite cases from that book was this guy. His name was Breck, and this took place up in Idaho. He was with his mom and his brother, and they went to a drive-in movie when he was about 10 or 12 years old. I think it was 12 actually, and they had to cancel the drive-in movie because as they were about to watch it, this weird fog comes rolling in like crazy. It was just weird because fog rolls in, but not like this. And so everyone got their refunds, and they're heading back home and moving, very slow pace through this thick fog. When the mother stops the car and says, "Look at that! There is this weird spotted skunk ahead of us on the road." And so Breck looks, he's in the back seat, he sees nothing, but his brother and his mother insist that there is this giant 3-foot spotted skunk. And he's like, "What are you talking about? There's nothing there." When suddenly this beam of light hits the car and hits this kid in the back seat, and he finds himself being pulled up through the roof of the car, and he's thinking to himself, don't hurt my family. What are you doing?" And he hears a message saying, "Oh, we're not interested in your family. We're just interested in you." And he's pulled up in this beam of light into this craft that's hovering, several hundred feet up, and he's laid out on a table. And he says, "Honestly, Preston, I couldn't tell you what the ETs looked like. I was too frightened. I don't remember their faces." Actually, he didn't remember any of this. All he remembered was being struck by the beam of light, and the next thing he knows, it's gone. The spotted skunk is gone, and they're much farther ahead on the road, and very near their house, and it's daylight. They had lost like 5 hours of time at least, and they walked into the house. Everyone's dazed, kind of in a trance, and they go directly to bed. Wake up the next morning very late, like 11 or 12, wondering why are they waking up so late. No one remembers anything at all except waking up late. And he didn't remember anything for years. They had weird crop circles appearing on their farm. They had no idea what was causing them. He went to the doctor once because he broke his leg playing football, and the doctor's like, "Well, that's weird. You must have broken your leg before." He's like, "No." He's like, "Well, yeah, you did, because you have a metal object in your foot." He's like, "Well, no, I've never had surgery. I don't know what you're talking about." He went to the dentist, and the dentist is like, "Well, this is strange. You have a foreign body here in your jaw." It showed up in the x-ray, and he brought in the nurse, and the nurse is looking at it, and they're, "No, we've never seen anything like this." And they actually extracted it and threw it away. And he didn't think anything of it until years later, when he bites down on his tooth and it cracks, and in comes this flood of memories spontaneously. Mind you, he never went under hypnosis or anything. He's rushed back to that evening where he was at this drive-in theater and was sucked up inside this UFO, and he recalls being taken aboard and these beings operating on him. They were operating on his mouth and on his foot, both areas where he had been diagnosed with a foreign body in his body, And he said the ETs were very strange. Every single thing they did, they had to vote on it. And it was like they'd take this yes and no vote, and majority won. And whatever they decided on doing, they would do it immediately. They worked very fast. He said the inside of the ship was very bronze-colored, which is a description I've heard from a couple of other people. And the light, there was no apparent light source that he could find. He says at one point the craft moved around, and they dangled him underneath the craft in this kind of bubble or enclosure where he could see 360 degrees around. And they darted around, they darted over his house, they darted over various areas. At one point they darted over telephone wires and sucked up the electricity, and told him that that's what they were doing. And he could actually see and feel this electricity being pulled up into the ship. They told him a bunch of stuff that went over his head, mathematical formulas and things like this that he couldn't retain, and just went on and on until eventually returning him to his car. And that's all he really recalls, and has no idea what to make of it. Hasn't had experiences before or since other than a few sightings, but was on board that UFO for 5 hours.
Wow. That is awesome. That's what I mean is we could all be going through these things and not have any recollection of it.
Yeah, and that's why I think that is taking place. And I think a lot of people never know they're even abductees. And yeah, at least 1 in 40 people have had this experience. I wrote an article for the MUFON UFO Journal in which I surveilled the major researchers and did my own kind of poll, if you will. And I called it 1 in 40 and said that UFO abductions are much more common than people realize. It's in the millions, and we have to start paying attention to this. And it was 1 year later that the Roper organization, who does polls, tackled the UFO problem and did a UFO poll that would ask about UFO abductions, markers for UFO abductions, such as having missing time, or a very close-up sighting, or seeing a ball of light in your room, and things like this. And they surveyed thousands and thousands of people and found that 1 in 50 people have the markers of a UFO abduction. So when that came out, the editor of the MUFON Journal wrote me back. He's saying, you predicted it. Definitely. That was a pretty impressive article, because it showed that UFO abductions are much more common than people realize.
I absolutely believe that without any doubt.
Yeah, the book after that I wrote was California Ghosts, and that uncovered the first UFO ghost cases that I was researching. And I don't know, Sue, there is a connection to these subjects. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I'm not sure if ETs are attracted to people who are psychic, or if they're causing some of these hauntings to some extent, or what's going on. But there is a connection there. It's loose at best. Most people who see a ghost, aren't going to have a UFO experience, or vice versa. But there is a connection there. Probably the scariest ghost story in that book was this guy I interviewed, Whitney Wright, who lived in Northern California, and as a child had what he called an imaginary playmate. But at some point, he began to wonder if it wasn't real, because things kept happening. He would be blamed for leaving lights on and doors open, and things were moving by themselves. He'd wake up and all the cabinets would be open and the house would be all torn up, and he would get blamed for it. He's like, no, I didn't do it. He was a single kid and lived alone with his mother. And this went on and on. He had a friend at one point who moved in, and his friend also experienced the activity. And by the time they were teenagers, it was pretty well known that Whitney had a ghost in his house in the neighborhood, because he could invite people over, and almost always something would happen, especially if it was a skeptic who'd say, oh, I don't believe in this stuff. And then, bam, the roof would start banging, or something would happen. A door would slam, the toilet would flush. And they used a Ouija board at one point, and they made contact with a spirit who said it was the ghost of the girl who drowned across the street. Now Whitney says, no, I don't think that's true. I think this ghost, whoever it is lying, and it's not a nice spirit. And as they were using the Ouija board, it had an old-fashioned pendulum pointer. This pendulum stuck straight out at a horizontal angle and broke. And so there was some sort of force there. But the haunting escalated, just kept going on, and to the point where one evening, Whitney was there with his friend Paul, and they were following this cold spot around the house. And they could actually feel where this ghost was, and they made a real big mistake. They started to walk into this cold spot and have it walk through them. And they could feel this spirit walking through their body, and it would give them this weird kind of dizzying rush, and they were playing with it. And they realized, oh, this is probably not a good idea. When they went to bed that evening, Whitney's in bed, and his friend Paul is, sleeping at the foot of the bed at an angle, and Paul is playing with this cold spot. And he says, oh, it's coming into me. It's coming into me. I can feel it. And suddenly it paralyzes both boys at once, throws them down to the bed. They can't move. And Paul starts fighting with it. He's screaming and starts talking in this, what Whitney said was speaking in tongues, in some weird, really dark, creepy language that completely freaked him out. And Paul had no memory of this at this point. He blacked out and doesn't remember screaming and talking in this language and running around. And Whitney jumped up and tries to wake Paul up, and Paul attacked him, scratching his face, causing wounds. And finally, Whitney was able to get him out of this trance and pull this spirit apparently out of him. And they never messed around with it after that. But following that, he was able to make the ghost manifest literally at will, and but refuses to do it anymore because it feels like it's just a bad presence.
I have a belief that these kids, these little kids who grow up and say that they have these imaginary friends that they're in constant contact with. I have no doubt whatsoever that these kids are really seeing these friends, and they're not imaginary. But us as adults, I think that we tend to shut the door on our kids. We stop them from seeing what's really there spiritually, like ghosts and stuff, because as they're growing up and they're seeing this stuff, we as parents are saying, nope, you're not, there's nobody there, there's no ghosts under your bed, there's nothing in your closet, you don't,
Right.
your friends are imaginary, you're not really seeing them, this has to stop now. And I think as parents we stop these kids from seeing what in fact is really there.
Yeah, and I found, after analyzing all the ghost cases I have, that a lot of them occurred to kids. And here's a really interesting statistic. Twice as many women as men, in my files at least, have seen ghosts or had ghost encounters. So there's got to be something to that. And, with UFOs, no, it's evenly divided right down to the 50-50 between men and women. But not with ghosts. It's a very obvious pattern there, which I'm not sure quite what to make of it other than perhaps women are more intuitive. But yeah, I've got one case where these two kids were in their bedroom and started screaming because their dead aunt was sitting in the chair looking at them. And although she wasn't threatening, she was just smiling and looking at them. They were terrified, and parents came running in and could not see the ghost at all. Had no idea that it was there. And they're like, it's right there, it's right there. Could not see it.
But in fact, they probably, and 9 out of 10 parents do that, is, they shut down that child, what they've really seen. And, I think that if we aren't shut down as children, we go on to see what the things that are really there.
Yeah, absolutely. If you, want to see a ghost, it's just a matter of meditating, staying still, keeping your eyes open, and raising your vibration up to, the astral levels, where there are a lot of ghosts. It's a real problem. In fact, in all the out-of-body books that I've read, and certainly my own experiences, it is a problem. People who die sometimes don't realize they're dead, and there are a number of spirits who are stuck on these lower astral planes in sort of a negative emotional state, some to the point where they don't even remember who they are. And this is actually pretty common for people who've had traumatic deaths. In auto accidents and airplane crashes, people who survive are often walking around in an amnesic, dazed state, and they're still alive. They don't remember the accident. They don't remember their own name until days afterwards, even, or hours afterwards, when they kind of snap out of it. And what happens is, if this happens and it kills you, you're put into this state of terror, and you're this wandering, terrified ghost who doesn't realize what's going on. And if you do out-of-body exploring, and this was the subject of my next book, it's the only book that I've written that's autobiographical, at some point you're going to be, I guess, required would be, or enlisted would be a better word, to do this kind of soul retrieval or soul rescue. In my case, I hadn't done it, and I was reading about all these other people who were doing it, and I thought, well, this should be an interesting experiment. I want to try that. So next time I was out of body, I'm like, well, this is what I want to try. Is there, a soul I can rescue? And I was taken to this location. It was a house, and I was taken to the basement or crawl space underneath the house, and there was this little girl there. She was about 8 years old. She was dead. She was a spirit, maybe 6. She was, blonde, wearing a dress, and I had a distinct impression that she had suffocated to death, or maybe even murdered, horrifically. And she was just distraught and crying. And I'm like, oh, it's okay, let's get out of here. She didn't trust me. I'm like, it's okay, let's get out of here. And I couldn't get through to her. And finally I said, do you want to go see your mom? She's like, yes, I would. And she took my hand. I'm like, great, I got her, And I took off straight upwards, and I was heading towards where I know is a very bright place, what I would call the heavenly realms. I'm not a particularly religious guy really at all, but this is the only way I know how to describe it, is because it's just heavenly. It's beautiful. It's like a pastoral park-like setting where the air itself sparkles with love. And this is where I usually meet deceased loved ones. And that's where I took her, and I got right to the border when suddenly, I'd lost track of her. And I was paying very careful attention, because this happens to a lot of astral travelers. They'll be taking people up, and suddenly they disappear. So I knew to pay attention. And suddenly she just let go, and I didn't see where she went, but I'm hoping she made it to the other side. So yeah, it's a huge problem, ghosts.
That's very cool. And I've noticed that a lot of these entities and such, I think they get lost. I mean, like you said, if you don't know you're dead.
Right. Well, there's multiple reasons, I think, why people become ghosts. Another is because they're attached to the earth in some way. Going out of body, I know exactly what it feels like to be a ghost, because the astral body is also called the desire body or the emotional body. And the reason for that is because this is where your emotions really kind of originate. And when you go out of body, boom, you're hit full force with all your repressed desires, whether it's lust or anger or gluttony or what have you. For me, it was lust. I would become overwhelmed by these sexual desire. Or gluttony. I would create these feasts of food and just gorge on it until then I could not even, operate. I couldn't move around. I was just overcome with desire. And this is what happens to, some people when they die, is they're not ready to leave the alcoholism or the drugs or the food or the lust or their money or their house or, even their family or whatever it is that they're obsessed with. So, and sometimes they feel guilty, they've led bad lives and they don't think they'll be welcomed by God or what have you to the other side, the light, so to speak, and they run away from it. And they end up in one of these lower astral realms, some of which I visited and are truly hellish. I mean, there's people screaming in agony, in some of these places, and I could not get their attention. You cannot, they're not interested. They're just so self-absorbed that they're stuck. They're lost in the darkness. So I don't think it's going to be a problem for anyone who has any conception of life after death. But if you're a skeptic and you're a very negative person, this could be a danger.
I went into my friend's house. She said that, well, her son and her son's girlfriend and child live there now, and she lives down the street with her boyfriend. But I went in because she said that it was so negative in there, and these things were happening that, her son was a very happy, good guy, and all of a sudden he's very angry and all this stuff. So I went in there, she said, "You're used to all this paranormal stuff, just come and check it out." So I went in there, and I have to tell you, the second that I walked in the door, there was a heavy presence on me that felt like tons and tons of weight on me. I was sweating, I was freezing, I was sad, I was angry, I was scared, I was all these things at once, and it was so overwhelming, and I've never felt that before. So I thought, okay, I'm going to shake this off, and I'm just going to walk through here. And I got upstairs, I got on the steps, and I couldn't breathe. And my feet were sinking through the steps, it felt like, and I said, oh my goodness, I don't feel good. So I got upstairs to the top of the steps, and the baby's room, as the closer I got to it, the more it was this overwhelming feeling of, Sue, just get out of here. And I walked in there and I said, this is where he did it. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, this is where he killed the kids. And I don't know where that came from because I didn't know any history of this house. I hadn't even looked it up or anything. Well, I knew that something bad had happened there, and I knew that it was somebody killing kids in that house. Well, I said a prayer in there, which was hard to say because it was like something trying to stop me the whole time I was even existing. It didn't want me in that house. So I got back downstairs and I said, you know what? I love you, but I have to leave. I've got to get out of here. I can't breathe. I can't handle this. So the second I stepped outside and I got, shut the door behind me, it all lifted off of me like it was crazy. It was just like somebody took a tractor trailer off my shoulders. And I felt fine. And when I got home, I had done a little bit of research on that property and stuff and what was there far before they were. Well, there was a man, and he was accused of these crimes of abducting children from this area and murdering them in his house.
Wow.
Well, his wife had killed him and then killed herself in that house. So there was never any proof. They believed that he was doing it, and they were investigating it, but before anything could actually come out of it, they were both dead. And, I know now that when I went in there, I experienced what this guy was and what he did. And that was probably the scariest thing I've ever been through.
It sounds, yeah, really scary. In another one of my books, Ghosts of Greater Los Angeles, I covered the case of Claudia, who was actually a good friend. I worked with her for quite a while. And she was one of those people who grew up with an imaginary friend, a poltergeist type thing. And like you, very sensitive to these energies and things. And she said it would get so bad that she could not go. If there was a car accident, she would have to turn around because if someone had died in that car accident, they would latch onto her. And for the next 2 weeks, she would have a haunting activity that would usually go away, but not always. And it happened when she would avoid hospitals as well because they just latched onto her. She was sensitive to this stuff. I think she was, mediumistic to a certain degree. And I think all of us do have some of that mediumistic talent. I think it's a natural human ability. And as you, evolve along the spiritual path and as you raise your vibration, or as, this becomes an aspect of your particular lifetime, this sort of thing is going to happen to people. In fact, as far as out-of-body experiencing, out-of-body exploring, I think that's also a natural human ability that as time goes on, everyone is going to be doing it. I just can't imagine that it's going to go any other way because it's such a profound human experience that sooner or later, everyone's going to be doing it regularly.
I think once everybody realizes that it's actually possible and that they can research it and figure out how to do it, I think you're right. It's going to become, you know, kind of a vacation.
Right. Well, I found that most people, the only reason they're not doing it is because they're skeptical. They don't think they can do it, or they're afraid. They're terrified, of what it might feel like, or they just don't have the time or energy. They work too hard. They don't get enough sleep, or they're on drugs or consumed by, television or whatever. But if you can get through those three obstacles, that's all it takes. All it takes is the desire to do it, and the intent, and just trying it. There are no special qualifications. And as far as dangers, I think it's about as safe as sleeping, honestly. And what I found, in fact, is the opposite. There's no real danger of getting possessed or lost or getting locked out of your body or anything like that, because you have a silver cord which will always draw you back. The difficulty is in staying out of body. And the benefits are enormous. Not only do you get to fly and move through walls and visit deceased loved ones and learn about past lives and meet advanced, enlightened beings, but you can actually physically heal yourself of all kinds of illnesses. I've got over 20 recorded cases that I collected, of which people have healed themselves of cuts, of colds, of chronic liver disease, of undiagnosed illnesses, of phobias, of smoking, of all kinds of things. So it's a wonderfully beneficial experience and will actually raise your energy. You don't come back tired, even though you're not really sleeping or unconscious. You're conscious the whole night, if you're good at it. And you come back just bouncing with energy. So much to the point that a number of people who've done this have actually levitated physically as a result, of their out-of-body travels.
I think I better go back in there and get rid of my phobia of mice, because then I could actually function better.
Yep, phobias mostly come from past lives, I think, or from childhood incidents that have been forgotten. But phobias are one really good way of, learning more about who you were in a past life.
I have no idea what my fear is of mice, but if they're in the vicinity, if they're in my house, they can have the house and I will move out. If they're outside, then I do not, that part of the whole yard, I won't go in again. And it's terrible. I was laying here the other night and looked down and there was a beady little thing looking at me and, oh, forget it. I was gone. It was, take care of that mouse right now. Get it out of here. Get it out of here. And I started hyperventilating. And it was, I don't know what the fear is. As a kid, you know what? There was mice, and I don't remember it even being a fear. But as I grew up, whoa.
Right.
It's not
Well,
okay.
This is probably a past life thing. For me, it was shipwrecks. I wasn't so much afraid. I was just obsessed. I'm talking like from 8 or 9 years old. I was reading about the Titanic and the Andrea Doria and any shipwreck. I must have now 50 or 100 books on sea survival, and never could make much sense of it until I got into out-of-body travel and realized, I had a lifetime as a pirate, and a lot of lifetimes on boats and ships and being lost at sea. So
I'm gonna go back in that past life and I'm gonna kick that mouse's butt so I can handle it.
yeah, it's a great way, a great vehicle, I think, for spiritual growth. Is out-of-body exploring, and I cannot recommend it enough. It will change your life.
For me, I think that the one that I can remember when my grandfather passed, I think that set me up so that now as an adult, I mean, I have 4 daughters, and now I lost my dad, and it was such a different experience losing my dad than it was my grandfather. I mean, I was so devastated when I lost my grandfather that I don't remember anything for a month of my life. I don't remember leaving my room. I don't remember eating, drinking, functioning in any way, which I'm sure I did, but I don't remember any of it. But with my dad, it was, you know what, open the door and let him go home.
Right.
It was so peaceful. And sometimes I think that we're given these out-of-body experiences without doing them ourselves for a reason, to give us, a message, or maybe fix something in there that helps us along the way later.
I think you're exactly right. And it turns out that the out-of-body experience is one of the most common, paranormal experiences that people will have. Some sort of out-of-body flying dream or out-of-body experience. 1 in 4 people will have that sometime in their life, or 1 in 2. And another statistic, which is about the same as precognition, a dream which comes true, or deja vu type thing. A lot of people have that as well. So a lot of people were saying, "Oh, I don't have any unexplained experiences." Well, look more carefully at your life, and you will see that in fact you probably have had some indication of it.
For deja vu, I do. That is like my biggest gift, I think. I've been doing tarots a lot of years, and that comes easy. Now I really don't even need cards. I can pretty much connect with people easier that way. But with deja vu, I will have a moment of deja vu, but it's not a normal moment. My mind rushes to the end of the whole thing. I see the outcome, and any deja vu moment I have ends badly. So for me, that's a warning sign that, you have to stop the events that are happening right this moment, change them in any way you can so that the outcome is different. And I have every time.
Wow. And see, this is the real purpose, I think, of dreams. The lowest level of dreams is kind of nightmares and sort of dreams of the images throughout the day. And above that are emotional dreams, dreams which kind of reflect our fears and desires. And if you analyze dreams, you'll see that most people's dreams are some reflection of that, either what you fear or what you really desire. But if you can bring lucidity, consciousness into the dream, that's the next state. And at some point, you don't even really need to dream. You'll be having out-of-body experiences, and that's the true purpose of dreams, is when you bring your waking awareness into the sleep state. And when you do that, you will have all these visions of the future and things like this, and you come to the physical world, and your dreams will play out in front of you, and you realize that the physical world is, in fact, very dreamlike. And you kind of come full circle and have what I would call like waking lucidity, where you realize that, physical reality is in fact composed of projections and is entirely predictable. Not entirely, obviously, but certainly able to have, future awareness.
I think in even some of the dreams that we think are silly, where silly things are happening and it cannot be possible that this is any kind of reality dream, I think that we have a message in that dream as well.
Oh yeah, dreams, I'm sure, are sent from our higher selves to kind of wake us up. In fact, if you look at dreams, almost every dream, pretty much without exception, if it's long enough, will have what I call a cue or an anomaly. And by that I mean some little detail in there that is just physically impossible. It's not real, and it's kind of put there to sort of wake you up and make you realize that this is, in fact, a dream. And yeah, dreams are very important. I remember I had one dream which was just so bizarre. I was attacked by a baby goat. I was outside, and this goat, I'm like, oh, look, there's a goat off in the distance. Comes running up to me, attacks me, pins me down, and I'm like, wow, all right. And I wake up. I'm like, well, this can't possibly come true. There's just no way. And I turned on the TV that day, and there was this news story about this man who had been attacked and killed by his pet goat, who he had tied up and abused. It got loose and it rammed him and killed him. And I'm like, oh, there's my dream.
That's awesome that you can dream like that.
I was not expecting that. Bizarre. But yeah, going out of body kind of activates all your chakras, I guess, is a good way of putting it, and just awakens you psychically in a lot of different ways. So it's a wonderful side effect of doing this kind of practice.
Where can we find all your books? Are they all for sale right now?
Oh yeah, you can go to my website, which is my name, PrestonDennett.com. If you Google my name, it'll take you there. The actual website address is PrestonDennett.weebly.com. But all my books are on there, as well as excerpts and reviews and things like this. And you can buy my books through the website. You can also contact me if you have a story you'd like to share or any questions. I'm always interested in hearing from people. And my books are also available at bookstores and, mostly through Amazon.com, I think would probably be the best place, or online bookstores like Barnes & Noble and places like this. But yeah, I've got all my books on my website and more upcoming. One book I'm really excited about, which is still doing well, is UFOs over California. And that was published, about 10 years ago, but it's still in print, and still, I still get little royalty checks from them. One interesting chapter in that book, which has just exploded, was this underwater UFOs. Almost as soon as I began doing UFO research locally, I was getting a lot of these accounts of UFOs that would move underwater off the coast here of Southern California. And I wrote an entire chapter about it in UFOs over California, and later an article about it for Fate magazine, which I titled, "Is There an Undersea Base Off the California Coast?" Because by that point I had like 50 accounts, including some people who were abducted not inside a UFO, but taken to some sort of underground area. And when you couple that with the accounts of, I've got 5 accounts, Sue, of people who've seen not 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 UFOs, but 50 or 100 or more. And they're not coming from above in these cases, they're coming from below. So I don't know if there's not a base down there in this Santa Catalina Channel, and there is a parking lot filled with UFOs. The bottom of the seabed has got to be covered with these objects because they are just very large in numbers and just so many cases. That article really got legs. It was syndicated. It was picked up in a number of areas. Newspapers were quoting it, and they got the interest of UFO hunters. And I was on Deep Sea UFOs as well, Deep Sea UFOs 1 and 2. And I'm still getting a lot of interest and constantly asked to speak about this alleged underwater base right off the coast here, which all began from that one chapter in UFOs over California.
I think it's amazing that you're out there and you're doing this stuff, the stuff you enjoy to do. I mean, so many people are in careers or have jobs that they don't enjoy and they dread every second, that they have to get up and go to work and, just to make this money, which isn't even enough to cover the bills, and it's always a dread. But, it's amazing when you have a passion and you can, you're doing what you want to do. You're writing books and you're researching and you're out there in the field enjoying what you do. And that's what I love about, interviewing. And this is my passion. I want a syndication. I want to go live on this because to be able to do something that you only ever dreamed you could do, and it's fun. I mean, that's what life is about. It's not about dragging yourself to work and, miserable, taking care of customers you don't want to be around. And for the people that enjoy that, that's fine. But, for people that have a passion like you do, and like I do, it's great that you're out there and you're doing it.
Right. Well, I have to tell you, I still have my day job, which, I wouldn't do it if I didn't get paid. I'm a bookkeeper, and it's excruciatingly boring at times, mind-numbingly. So by day, that pays the bills. And at night I do my UFO and ghost research and out-of-body exploring and what have you. And it doesn't, I'm able to pay for my habit, but I don't make a whole lot of money at it, at least certainly not for quite a while. I'd say the best year I ever had from my writing, I made, $4,000 or $5,000, which is not obviously enough to live on. So at this point, I'm not doing it full time or making a living at it by any means. But hopefully one day, I do hope to do that. And I'm now 50 years old, so at some point, I am going to be able to retire and hope to be able to do this full time. But yeah, I do enjoy it. Boy, the passion is, I have to tell you, it's just so interesting. And I am blessed to be able to, pursue this because I find it just the most fascinating thing ever.
For us who are interested in writing books, that's something that I've been working on, is just getting the material around. And it's not the writing the book that's hard for me. It's trying to figure out Can we self-publish? Do you have to go through a publisher? How do you get your books out there? How do you get them in bookstores? Can you tell us how to go about that?
Yeah, boy, I learned that the hard way, and certainly had no idea what I was doing, other than I wanted to get this information out. And I've worked with a number of different publishers. I haven't self-published at this point, though now that with Kindle and the Amazon, you can actually download a book over a weekend once it's properly formatted and self-publish your own book. I think for most people, I wouldn't recommend this unless you have some avenue of publicity, whether it be radio or television or a magazine or a convention or something, because you're probably not going to get a whole lot of sales otherwise, unless you're Gene Aul or J.K. Rowling. But yeah, anyone can write a book. It's not hard to do, and if you have difficulty writing, well, there's software out there where you can just talk into your computer and it will write it down for you. Dragon software, I believe it's called. And a book is nothing more than just a collection of stories. And if you're passionate about it, that passion will shine through, and readers will love it, I think, because that's what we're all looking for. We're just looking for, excitement and entertainment and information. And if you're passionate and obsessed with a subject, well, other people will share that. And once you put a book together, it's just a matter of making sure it has its chapters. It should be about 100 pages minimum, no more than 300 or 400. And you can send it out to different publishers. There's all kinds of ways to do that. If you go online, you can look up various writer websites which list writers' markets, publishers that specialize in this type of thing. And I have to tell you, there is a publisher for every subject out there. There's a publisher that publishes nothing but books about caves, another that publishes nothing but books about knitting, nothing but books about, food or army helmets, for God's sake, or any subject you can imagine. And UFOs are very popular. There's a number of publishers who do specialize in UFOs, and are definitely willing to consider a book. It's just a matter of finding them. You can, the Writer's Market, published by Writer's Digest, is probably the best place to look this stuff up and just send your book out. Most people do it through email these days, so it's a pretty simple process of just getting your book together, getting a nice title for it, and proofreading it as much as possible, maybe give it to a few people to see what they think, and just polish it up as best as you can, and make sure the passion there is in it and the information is correct, and send it off. And I have to tell you, I sent out my first book, 1 in 40, the first one I wrote, to many people, and it took me a long time to find a publisher. Finally found one. They never got into bookstores, and I never got a royalty check. I never made a dime off that thing. Whereas UFO Healings, which was a really unique book and kind of, groundbreaking in a way, because no one had ever written about this, I found a publisher right away, and it did really well. Whereas probably my most successful book, UFOs Over Topanga Canyon, I sent that off to 40 different publishers, and they all rejected it, every single one, until I finally sent it to Llewellyn. They loved it. They published it, gave me a publicist, and that book did really well for me. It sold like almost 5,000 or 10,000 copies, and gave me some pretty hefty royalty checks for quite a while. So yeah, anyone can do it. I would definitely recommend it. It's a transformative experience, and a real good way of exploring a subject. I kind of wrote these books halfway for myself, because I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And it's a real good way of organizing information in your own head, is to put together a book.
How does it work, the royalties work when you have a publicist? How much do you get paid, like what percentage and stuff?
Right. Well, all publishers are different. I've worked with publishers who give me like 5% royalty, which is terrible. Even 2.5%, upwards up to about 20%, which is probably the best deal I got. This is from, physical book publishers. If you were to self-publish, you can get upwards of 70% royalties by doing it through yourself through a process like CreateSpace, a self-publisher, or something like that, through Amazon Digital Services, and they'll send you reports, royalties. Most publishers will send you a sales report, a royalty report, every 6 months. Sometimes it's quarterly, sometimes it's yearly, but most of them it's every 6 months, in which they list all the books that have sold, the number of returns, and the number of foreign copies, and so on. And they'll send you, like say, you sell 50 or 100 books, they'll break it down, and you get your little royalty check for that amount. So it's pretty easy. I think the hard part is getting your book accepted and getting your book publicized, because a lot of books just kind of fall into a black hole, and yeah, you got your book published, but nobody knows about it. And now with the internet, that is much easier to tackle. You can put up a website. There's all different kinds of ways of publicizing, obviously, but there are 8 million some books on Amazon.com, so it's extremely competitive. It's like the acting field or singing or a lot of the creative fields. They're saturated with people who are trying to hit it big.
Well, you have people like Stephen King who, I mean, they have up-teen books that they're selling, and they make a really good living off of it. I mean, they're making mega bucks off of it, and I wonder, what the difference is in those authors and people that are just, writing books.
There's none. Stephen King, boy, his story is really interesting. He wrote what was his first book? Christine or something like that?
Yeah, about the car. Yeah.
And he threw it away. Threw it away. He was disgusted with it. And his wife fished it out of the garbage and says, "No, I like the book. Send it out." Or maybe it was Carrie. I forget. One of his early books. And he sent it out and ended up getting a bidding war on it and made a bundle of money. And he got really lucky. He kind of won the lottery. So it's just a matter of skill meeting opportunity. It's just a matter of persistence, really. If you just don't give up. If I had given up, with UFOs over Topanga Canyon, I probably would not have continued to write books, and it took me over 40 tries. And for that matter, Communion, Whitley Strieber's book, was rejected by every major publishing house, and finally was picked up by Beech Tree Books, and he was given $1 million advance, and the book became a bestseller for 5 years. Lots of stories like that. Frank Herbert's book Dune, no one wanted to publish it. J.K. Rowling's book Harry Potter went through many, many publishers before someone finally picked it up. And now it's the best-selling book in the world, or certainly one of the best-selling books ever.
That's hard to believe. I mean, she went from rags to riches, and the storyline is just phenomenal. I mean, for people like me, once you watch the first movie, you have to watch the next one and the next one. And, like she said, she started out with just a thought in her mind, and look where she's at.
Yeah, the books are phenomenal. They're absolutely tremendous books, really entertaining, and what a great writer she is. So yeah, I think if you just persist, you've got to find your niche. For me, it was, UFOs and the paranormal. And I have to tell you, this is wide open, this field, for writers and researchers. There's so much to uncover at this point. There's just not been, yes, there's a lot written about it, but there's so much more to explore about, because it's a changing situation. And so that's where I've been very lucky with my own niche. I found where I feel comfortable, but I think there's readers for everyone out there who is, wants to write a book about whatever they're passionate about.
I've had several people that I've interviewed send me their books to read before the interview, and they're simple, but yet all the information is there, and you can't put the books down. The first one, I was honored and actually very lucky to have L.A. Marzulli start out my whole career. He was my first guest on the show, and it was, I didn't know what he was going to say when I wrote to him and said, "You'd be my first interview, and this is my passion." And And he said, "Oh, absolutely." He says, "I'd be glad to come on," and it was great. And he helped me kick off my career big, but he sent me on the Trail of the Nephilim 1 and 2, and you couldn't put those books down. I mean, once you pick those books up, it's the information is so that's that's what to me makes a good author. I mean, it's doing your homework. As you said, you have to do your homework. And when you do your homework, it shows in the books that you write.
Right, right. I think that people who are going to be successful are the ones who are really, obsessed with their subject. Because, as far as UFOs, there are hundreds of books published each year, and the vast majority of them are rehashes of old cases, of stuff we've heard before. And those, generally speaking, don't do as well as the ones that are, cutting edge with new information, or have something to say. So yeah, I think you're right.
That and biblical things, like with L.A. Marzulli, it's all about bringing the Bible to life, and the proof that there was a Nephilim, and that the Nephilim was actually the product of the fallen angels mingling their blood with humans. And he's done his research, and it's right there, and it connects so much with what the Bible says. And I think you're right. When you have a passion, and for me it's hard because I have so many passions, and they're deep passions. I mean, I'm so into the paranormal, but I love the ufology, and I love the Bible stuff, and I'm into so many things. It's hard to pick a subject and go with it.
Right. Well, I know what that's like. I've got so many books I want to write. One of my favorite books I wrote was called Human Levitation. And I wrote that because I met this lady, a family friend, who, I went to every friend I know. I'm like, have you had any unusual experiences? This is where I get my interviews. And she's like, oh yeah, when I was a child, I levitated. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, I was at the doctor's office with my family, running down the corridor, had just turned the corridor, and was out of view of anybody when I lifted up and flew all the way down the corridor, turned the corner, and went all the way to the end, and landed softly on my feet. And I'm like, you're kidding. She says, no, I was near the roof. There was nobody there. I felt like I was being lifted. I don't know how. I tried to do it again, was never able to do it. No one believed her. And so I got interested in levitation, started asking everyone, and I found another first-hand witness who said that she levitated up and down the stairs as a child. And eventually interviewed a number of people who've had this experience, and located about 300 to 400 reports stretching back to early history to the current day, and wrote probably the fullest length book on since about 100 years almost. There was another book called Levitation, written in French quite a long time ago, but following that there was just a few booklets here and there covering various aspects of it, but not the whole gamut. So that was a really exciting book for me to write, and really I got to explore my passion into the paranormal in a subject that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and so that's a good example, of picking a subject and running with it.
You're a very fascinating person, and I would really love to thank you so much for the time that you took to come on, and I'm really hoping that you'll come on and chat with us again. There's so much more to talk about with you, and I feel like it's endless with you, and that's what I like, the fact that there's so much to cover. So I'm hoping that you'd come back on with us and share more with us soon.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a blast. Thanks for having me on the show. And yeah, I look forward to doing it again for sure.
Can you give us your website once again, just so our viewer or our listeners have it, so that they can come on and check you out and your books out and stuff?
Yeah, sure. My website is www.PrestonDennett. That's D as in Delta, 2 N's, 2 T's. PrestonDennett.weebly.com. Yeah, all my books are there, and you can contact me through my website if you have any questions or an experience that you'd like to share.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to having you back on here. We got lots more to talk about.
Awesome. Thanks, Sue.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it.
You have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye. That, you guys, was an awesome interview. I'm looking very forward to having him on here again, as he's got so many books and so many stories and so many things to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to it. Well, that's all we have time for today, and we post all our shows on YouTube. And if you want to know more about our guests and upcoming shows, visit our info2rail webpage. Just Google info2rail and click our Google Sites page. I want to thank you guys, each and every one of you, for joining us here at info2rail. Without the guests and the listeners, this wouldn't be possible, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you. I can't emphasize that enough. I hope to see you here each and every week. We have new guests and new subjects, and they're all amazing and interesting. So we hope to see you here. May God bless you and keep you, and may His face shine upon you in these uncertain times. We'll see you soon.